Hello everybody and welcome to, I think it's the 72nd edition, Stan, of the Frank Stan chat. We lose count because these seem to come around so frequently, but as you can see everyone, we have two guests with us today, and we have the usual friend of mine from long back, Stan's with us again, but anyway, welcome.
I get
Neil
the feeling
and
that this is a build up to me not being here.
No, I just wanted to tell you Neil's the new Frank next week, but anyway, morning Neil and Rebecca. Rebecca, would you like to just introduce yourself so that those who don't know you have some idea what you do and why you might be here?
Yeah, so my name is Rebecca Smith, and I'm a head teacher. I'm a head teacher of an 11 to 18 secondary school, but I first met Frank because my previous headship was in the Co-op Academies Trust.
It was at Co-op Academy North Manchester, where Rebecca Smith transformed the school. So an amazing effort. And I have to say, somebody, Rebecca, I don't know if you heard it, but somebody who runs a very large multi-academy trust very close to where we live, put on record that she never thought that that school could be turned around, but she was full of praise for the fact that it had been achieved. So well done to you. And Neil,
I'm the team.
And the team, yeah. It takes leaders, though. It takes leadership. Neil, who are you? What are you doing here?
It's a really good question. I just appeared by surprise. Good morning, everyone. My name is Neil Smith. I am the head of Cheadle Hume School, which is a 3 to 18 independent day school in Cheadle Hume. I've known Frank for several years through Rebecca. There's really interesting work, partnership with aspects of the co-op, and of course the most important thing is I am the husband of Rebecca as well. I think what I probably should do soon, what a way to find out. And as of this morning when we explained to our children what we were doing, they said, "Why are you appearing on the Frankenstein chat?" They thought it was some kind of merry showy naked gothic we're doing. So
Gothic horror, here we come.
English literature for the next half an hour.
Yeah. It's really interesting because both, well, obviously, Rebecca and Neil live quite close to me, but we never really meet. We never bump into each other at all, even though. And there's also another colleague, Nick, who lives very close to us as well, who still works in the co-op. And again, I never bump into him either. So I think what happens is you're all sort of trying to avoid me. So as I go down towards the co-op,
I think people see you, Frank, first and then take down back alleys and things to avoid.
Found out now, Neil.
Right, let's get on. So, Stan, what's caught your eye this week?
Something you'll say it's political, but I'm not sure it is. Fact checking. We now have a fact check when people speak, and when it just worried me that when the Prime Minister's giving a speech to conference, we need companies to come in and check whether those things that have said are the truth or not. And it went without thinking, first of all, when I saw it, and I read the fact checking and saw that some of the things that were said weren't facts. But it just made me wonder where we've got to, where we accept that somebody afterwards will tell us what was true and what wasn't true in a Prime Minister's speech. And we like to relate it to schools, and I just wonder how long a head teacher would be in a job if the governors had felt that they needed to fact check a head teacher's report to governors. You wouldn't last, would you? Oh, by the way, you only lied to us about one thing, so that's okay. You can carry on in the job. Why are we accepting it? I give up.
Well, it's funny. I keep referring back to these 7 signs of ethical collapse. This amazing, very small book, but based on a PhD. Thesis, which was looking at why did some of the larger companies like Enron and others, Lehman Brothers, why did they close? Why did they fold? And one of them is basically sort of giving grace or atoning. That's it. The sense that actually there are sort of benefits in this leader in other areas. We'll let this sort of weakness just go by. Because actually we need the strength that he or she provides in other areas, and that's one of the seven sort of signs of an ethical collapse. And it's interesting, when I was in the co-op, when I was the CEO, I actually wrote a note to staff to say, I would never consciously, I don't know why I was doing that, I would never consciously, if I had actually misquoted or given sort of the wrong data or whatever, then I was encouraging them to sort of tell me that I got it wrong. I didn't go out of my way to do it in that way, but I wanted them to be clear that I wasn't going to sort of try and hide behind some sort of dodgy figures or try and put a positive spin on something that actually was not very good. So I mean,
I think a quote from one of the books that are behind me is, the culture of an organisation is set by the worst behaviour the leader's prepared to accept.
Yeah.
And I think that's true now of major organisations and political parties in the country.
Yeah.
I think what's first to me is why that's occurred, and is it someone being deliberately ambiguous or obfuscating or choosing to lie because the message is more important than the fact, or is it actually simply down to human error or laziness if they are relying on advisors to write the speech, to do the research from them? So at what level is it that someone is providing this information to them? And it's always happened. And I think that it's also of interest that it's gained greater attention now, possibly because of certain political leaders, and it becomes part of the dialogue between the media and the politicians as well, isn't it? The media have a wider agenda, I think, to try and catch out politicians and leaders for when they've made a mistake or where they had told something which isn't true as well. So I don't know if it's just such an indication that we have necessarily bad leaders or poor leadership. I think it's probably a combination of things that have got us to this stage. I mean, the worrying thing is that maybe we live in an age of postmodernism where it doesn't matter about detail of facts and evidence, and every view is valid. It doesn't matter how hollow actually or superficial that is as well. But I agree, it's a real concern.
But doesn't that then go back to that idea that, as a leader in an organisation, we do accept that people don't always get things right, but it's about what happens, what conversations it is and what happens the next time. And I suppose it's whether we, continue to accept things that are wrong as a leader, or we do something about it and try to help somebody to get better, I suppose. So, yeah. So maybe actually what you're also saying, Stan, is about that idea about how many times do you accept something that maybe isn't right before starting to do something about it as a leader yourself.
Or maybe people putting the hands up and saying, actually, I gave you the wrong figures then, rather than sort of doubling down on it and insisting that those things are correct when they're eminently not correct. It builds a distrust, I think, and I do agree, Neil. It's not happened in the last fortnight. I mean, we had in the Blair years, we had spin doctors, didn't? That's when spin came to the top, where we turned bad statements round into positives. So I'm not suggesting it's a brand new thing. I just think we've got to a stage now where people don't trust what's said. And I saw a poll where they were saying, who do you think's the most honest? If you're having to ask for your prime minister and possible next prime minister whether they are honest or not, I just think we're in a really sad state.
I think, though, that some leaders, trying to bring this round to schools, is that they've got a sunny disposition. They cope better when things are put across in a more positive way, and actually that's great when things are going well. But actually, some of those leaders I've worked with who are like that, they actually find it difficult to sort of really address the sort of when they get to a really dark place. They find it very difficult. They're not used to managing it in that way. They just want to put, it's not positive spin. I just think it's in their nature to want to be positive. I think it's not as if they're acting sort of out of character. I think that's just the way that they are. And of course, they then, when you hit a black spot, a very dark spot, it actually becomes very difficult for them to manage that, because I think they lose that sort of sense of sensitivity around the issue. And I think I've seen leaders that struggle with that. Yeah. Neil, what's caught your eye?
Well, I think what I've been interested in for the past few weeks is the various submissions to the Times Education Commission, which is looking at a new way in which to frame education as we come out of COVID, as we're all doing in our own schools and networks as well. But I think this is a really interesting project which they've undertaken. And the paper which was produced this week by Michael Barber, I think was of particular interest. Now, for those who don't know, he's had quite a long and varied career. When I was doing my BTC, he was Professor of Education at the university where I was. He then obviously worked for Labour government, and he's been an advisor for Blair, has been part of other NGOs as well since then. And in shorthand, what Barber is proposing in his submission is that fundamentally there is a gap in the cultural capital which students have acquired during their time in school. A gap which emerged, he would argue, between students of different types of school or different class of student as well. And he would argue that the school year needs to be completely revisited so that there are dedicated ring-fenced days within the school year where students are taken off to visit bastions of democracy like the Palace of Westminster, visit museums, do some work experience, do the sorts of things that maybe children might do with their families, or otherwise you would hope that schools would be able to do otherwise. And I think what's of interest is, one is emphasising the importance of that very broad education, that education doesn't simply take place in a classroom. But I think it also highlights a worry that maybe schools are finding it difficult. Obviously, it's been exacerbated because of COVID, but are finding it difficult to take children out on these really important visits to these sites, such as museums, galleries, etc., etc. Indeed, to connect with institutions of local democracy or national democracy as well. And it's so that's a bit I think is of interest. And what I suppose I struggle with a little bit is it should be sort of compulsory days within the school year. That's almost from a practical point of view. Why can't you build that into your curriculum anyway? That's what worries me, that it isn't already been built into your curriculum, and that let's address it as an issue, but let's actually do it through the existing structures. Not least of which, because there are massive logistical problems with actually having all children off timetable for a bit of time across the country.
And also, I mean, I mean, Stan, this is up your street. I know this is up Rebecca's street as well. But it's just the logistics of all of this, isn't it, really?
I didn't see it as being specific. I saw it as being, like almost like you taken away inset days, but distributed them however the school wants to manage it. But there would be a requirement that children over the year had 5 days on cultural activity. My point was that I did email, put a Twitter response to it, was the cost, because actually, the cost of going to a museum looks like it should be nil, but getting a coach to go to the museum is probably £500. So that's £20 per, if you're taking a class, £20 per student. So if you do that 7 times, that's quite a lot of money. If that was funded by, I suggested a cultural capital fund that was used only for those purposes, then I'm all for it. I did suggest a residential should be part of it at least once in a child's school life, that they should experience a residential time. But apart from that, I thought it was innovative, and it shone a light once again on children getting out of the classroom and what that can do.
Rebecca?
So I think anyone that knows me knows that I'm sort of really passionate about developing the whole child. And I know Neil's curriculum at his school, the curriculum at the school where I am at the moment, the previous work that I did was not just about what goes on in the classroom, was actually about the whole child. So actually, it's how you define your school's curriculum, surely, isn't it? And I think when I read the article, I was deeply saddened to think that maybe those experiences weren't being built into a child's rich, broad education, and that's just what we expect to do. So, going back to about that idea about school culture, it is really important that every child has a chance for extracurricular. It is really important they get decent careers opportunities. It is important they get leadership opportunities. It is important that they have a great personal development opportunity. But it's also important that actually, if you're trying to define what the best historian is, what does actually that mean, not just in terms of what you're going to get in the classroom, but what else are you going to be able to do? What are we going to enable you to see, to visit? And I think that all those things need to then be wound into the broad offer of a school. And certainly that's what I'm looking at when I'm thinking of a decent school to send my child to. And that's what I'm looking for when I'm thinking about the offer that I, give to the children at the school where, where I'm really proud to be the head teacher of. I don't think we need 10 days. I think if somebody's going to force 10 days of that, then that's a little bit sad, because I think students also need to see the connection between things and how they fit in, which I don't think is just today we're going off to the beach or the sea because we've not, done that. Actually, how does it connect to why we're doing it, etc. So I agree with Neil. This might be a first. I agree with Neil for sure. In terms of,
well, it would have made much more positive viewing if you hadn't agreed with him, but we'll let you agree with it.
In terms of actually what it is, and also just going back and thinking about what do we mean by curriculum. So here we have a personal development faculty as well as having a maths faculty, because that's actually equally as important as developing that skill as much as it is about being able to do maths, if you get what I mean.
Why do you think?
I sort of argued quite well. I wrote to Ofsted when they were defining curriculum to say the word experience was missing from everything they wrote. So when people were planning a curriculum, they weren't planning in what experience will this child have in this year, in this school. And some of those experiences are really important to underpin skills and underpin knowledge and underpin understanding. And I just feel we've lost, in terms of a national level, we've lost an understanding that experiences are what children remember and what they do and how they develop. I would say that goes back to how the school defines curriculum. Yeah, I agree.
If you define curriculum more than just the series of lessons that are going to be experienced and the skills and knowledge in the classroom, and actually about what opportunities do we give, what extracurricular do we give, what leadership opportunities do we give, what careers education do we give, then you would expect every department to be feeding into that bigger picture. So maybe it's about that broader sense of curriculum then in terms of a school and agreeing what that is. But yeah,
I suppose what I did really like was what he really was trying to articulate is, as we've all been trying to hear, is that education is what we're about. It's about the young people that we create and the attitudes and skills and knowledge and behaviours that they're able to develop during their time at school, and that we need that breadth of educational experience in order to develop those young people in that way. And I think where the issue of tensions is just simply about the rather sort of clunky way that he was advocating that we actually go about achieving that. Yeah,
how you create happy and successful individuals, who can go on with all those skills. I agree with you again.
Wow.
I did think the other part of his submission.
We can actually do this on a weekly basis or whenever you require it,
Hey, but we charge you, Frank, if we're doing that.
It's the most we've seen each other probably all terms. Thank you. Okay. Yeah.
I was saying the other part of his submission about exams was also interesting, because I think that's got a lot to offer the arts particularly. Where he was talking about taking the model almost of a music grade exam system, where students could, at a younger age, go for different and build a grade. And he used modern foreign languages as the route for that. But I was thinking, maybe some of the arts that have been squeezed in the curriculum, and some children now no longer get that opportunity. But to say, well, you could do that and do a graded test up to, and now I go beyond my knowledge and understanding, up to a grade that would be acceptable as towards, I don't know, towards whatever it's called, the EBAC.
Yeah.
So you could do that at age 14, say.
Sorry, Stan, it is interesting because we're also part of a group looking at sort of mastery transcripts and looking at how we sort of measure and develop skills of students. And one of the ideas that's been suggested is that we need to be more flexible when students can do their exams. The bit I'm concerned there, I suppose, is twofold. One is that everything then becomes about passing the exam. And I suppose we all see it through our own experience of a child who is practicing their clarinet or piano or guitar. It's all, I've just got to pass it and that's all that matters. So that could create additional stresses and strains on the child. But also, secondly, I suppose it mitigates what we were trying to say before about what the purpose of education is. It's not just about the exams. It is actually about learning. And I think if we reduce it simply to about just passing a test and try to get it done as early as possible, that again might undermine what we more broadly is trying to do with young people.
I think if children who might blossom in art, who get that part of the curriculum's closed to them because they're told if they want a university place, what they'll need to do is A, B, and C, and yet they've got an interest, something that might even not take place in the school or the grade exam, but then it'd be recognised as a qualification alongside their GCSEs or whatever else they do.
I think it's interesting. It's interesting. I heard Neil use the word skill. It's as if in the state sector, Neil, it's as if there is a sort of concern that if you use that word too often, that actually it all gets very flaky, and you know the knowledge element of this is lost. You know, so I think it's interesting just listening to all of this, because you know the work I do with the Northern Powers Partnership. You know, we speak to very senior people in major international as well as UK companies, and you know, they basically want what we're all giving or sharing today. You know, this sense that the exam factory and what that means, you know, that you enter into a sort of sausage making machine and the product at the end is how you're judged through your GCSE or A-level results. You know, that's where some schools have got themselves. You know, and actually I think young people in those schools are harmed by that experience, you know, and I don't know what it is. Well, I know what it is. I think I know what it is that's preventing those schools from being liberated from that sort of, you know, that cycle of examination, you know, as if that is the end goal of education. But actually speaking to employers, that's not what they want, you know. And actually I was speaking to one in Blackpool recently, a digital business, was saying they're looking now at students who duck out of university. They're looking at some students as to what, that was a really brave move. What made you do that? You know, what was the reason behind that? Because if it was because it was a rubbish course and it wasn't actually relevant and whatever it may be, then they actually want to speak to that person. You know, so it's really interesting that it's not, I think in education, some people view it as the pathway. You know, this is the way, it's the ladder, you get up the ladder as far as you can get. But actually I think businesses are looking for a much more rounded experience than just those examinations, and I'm not sure that we're giving them the insight. I don't think the children, the young people, view it that way. I think they see the exams as do or die, but actually, you know, there are many employers out there who want that word skill and refinement and all the other stuff that young people get from a really good school experience.
I think to some extent I was guilty of that when I was ahead, because, you know, in my vision, what the children did and developed, the skills they developed, the knowledge and understanding, all came from school. And it was only when we put a school band together and somebody came in to organise that, and I said, well, we've only got sort of 4 children who do music, peripatetic music in school, so we can't really have a band. And this tutor said, have you asked which children do music outside of school? And it never occurred to me to ask that question. And we ended up with a band that played a whole range, including the drums, because the children had, you know, I always said the band sounded much better through 2 closed doors. And it made a pleasant noise, but it was my ignorance really that you know, if they weren't learning at school, it didn't count somehow. And I think part of why I like the Michael Barber idea is it would pull in some of those things that people did into a sort of global achievement rather than just achievement that happened actually physically in school.
Right, do you know what? We've had 25 minutes and we've still we're not getting on it. Rebecca, what's caught your eye this week?
Well, mine's probably a little bit boring compared to those things, but I suppose it's an ongoing concern about the number of children who are absent, you know, due to COVID. I don't want to give a fact now because I'm very nervous, but the Times had quoted that something like 200,000 children or something, you know, absent last week. I think I've got that far too high, to be honest. So please, nobody fact check me at the end of this. But basically, there's a huge number of children who are still out of school. And I think the difference for me is that it isn't due to self-isolation rules. These children are actually got COVID and they're unwell. And, you know, there's still huge pressures, I suppose, then in terms of providing the education for them. And I think it's something that we just need to still talk about. I think we're talking about attendance at school and education is getting back to normal, but actually I think on the ground, we're not experiencing that. I was speaking to a teacher yesterday who has not had a full, you know, has not had all their year 11s in class all year, for example. They've had at least one child, and it's a different child or a different 3 children absent each time they've got a lesson. And, you know, I just think that we need to really think about that. And then we've got the vaccinations coming in, but that they are staggered. So some schools are getting the vaccinations to have them. Some schools are getting the vaccinations in December. We've got our dates for December, some of us. And again, that means that situation may not be solved or supported until January, where some schools it might have an impact after half term, dependent on your uptake rate. So I think it's something that we still need to look at and put back into the media spotlight.
I agree. I want to get to Neil because I know he's dealing with an issue at the moment, but my wife asked me if I could find out what the number of young people between 12 and 15 who had been vaccinated, at least with one jab. So there was some data released this week that it was, and I expected it to say something like 12%. I don't know why, but it said something like between 9 and 12%. I was thinking, well, surely you know. But anyway, it's around that figure. And I think that the general public think that because it's been announced, it's happened, you know, so all of them are vaccinated at least once. But actually, just to put the record out there, it's just over 10%. You know,
but with what was that?
See, we don't edit it. Neil, what happens? You're dealing with an outbreak at the moment, aren't you?
Well, I think what we found across the local authority and lots of other schools in the Greater Manchester region, I think we found that the pattern of cases has fluctuated since the start of term, and some were hit really badly at the start, then it's eased off. We've had a really quiet period up until this week when we've seen, you know, a larger number of students unfortunately affected by it. But broadly in line with what's happening across the local authority, having spoken to public health experts and heads elsewhere. And I think what's worrying is when we speak to heads across the region is the children who are out at the moment, and that these they don't tend to be the sixth form, but they are in exam groups. And I think although we've got fewer children off having to self-isolate, just looking down the line, that we've obviously said, the government said very clearly that exams are going to take place. I just have a worry for our young people at age, you know, 15, 16, who may not have had that same experience as other children around the country, and therefore we may get an unequal picture of the amount of course that's been covered by students, their time in the classroom. So actually, it's not going to be a fair comparison of students around Wales where exams.
I have to say, Neil, I was really taken with your blog, the blog that you issued recently. I thought, you know, it's very rarely that you read something that, oh God, I wish I'd written that myself, you know, oh God, you know, that sort of captured how I felt about it. But basically, you know, just want to sort of just explain, you know, what the thrust of that was in terms of exams.
Yeah. So this was a blog I wrote for a group that we work with called Rethinking Assessment, and it was just me reflecting on our experience during the summer. And I think there's a lot of learning that schools and departments within schools have done as a result of the CAG, SAG, TAG process. And I think we all feel that we shouldn't lose that learning. Obviously, it's a really difficult situation for everybody concerned, the families of students, the schools, for the exam boards. But I think there were some learning points for us that could hopefully improve the assessment process and hopefully benefit our children moving forward. for example, when I talk to our heads of department, they say, well, actually, now we've all got a much stronger idea
Right.
of what different grades look like. Our assessment processes are much improved because we're now going to bring in blind marking across the board. Our standardisation processes for all assessments are going to be improved. I think, well, that's only going to benefit the children, because then hopefully that quality feedback will improve to them as well. And I think also, and this is probably a slightly more controversial point, I think maybe it's opened up a discussion about whether a one-shot deal is the right way to judge what a child is capable of. And I know we've had coursework in the past and there have been discussions and issues around that, but it doesn't simply have to be a return to traditional NEAs or coursework. There are more probably innovative ways we do it. In the US, they use a GPA model, which again isn't perfect. There are issues with that. But I'm sure if we can look at the experience of other countries and some of the wider research about assessment to come up with something better, and not simply return to what we had in 2018, 2019.
Yeah, I agree.
On that COVID, just to go back to Rebecca's point, I've read 200,000 as well, Rebecca, so we'll both be fact-checked and proved wrong. I'm just wondering at what point it becomes we implement the plan B that we're told exists. If it's 200,000 pupils a day, how many we're going to go to before we decide that we need to do something about it?
Well, I think you were saying, Rebecca, that that you started to introduce face masks and things like this. Is that correct?
Yeah, so some schools have gone to contingency measures, face masks. Some, maybe discussions. I know there was something again in the press that some areas are going back to bubbles, etc. Some schools haven't left bubbles, and we've all got our own other risk assessments that are going on in terms of that. I think for me the point is that we aren't out of the woods. I'm not necessarily sure, because I just feel that we're putting our eggs all in the vaccine basket, and actually that's dependent on when you get it and the uptake. And a lot of people say, well, we started catch up or whatever we want to call it, but actually we haven't got children necessarily in the school in any of those year groups who may need that catch up. They may not actually necessarily be in because they're still suffering from the impact of COVID. And I just think that we need to look very carefully. I don't think it's by any means a normal year, and I'm not quite sure. I think we all want to get over this, but I think it goes back to that mantra, doesn't it, that actually we've got a lot of differences in regions and how they've been impacted and affected, and this isn't something that is just going to go in by the end of this academic year, and we're still being impacted by it now.
And we've got to 33 minutes, and I haven't done what's caught my eye, but I'll quickly do that, and that'll bring it to a close. But I've been approached by a number of Ofsted inspectors and HMI in the last couple of weeks. I think there's just a real feeling that there is a bit of a disconnect between what inspectors are being asked to report on in schools and what is important for schools. And a number of them are thinking of just jacking it in, I suppose in a way I'm also sort of intrigued by any current practitioner who's an Ofsted inspector who's out there doing inspections at the moment. I'm thinking, my goodness, you must be running a very, very capable school. But anyway, I think for me it's around just see how that runs. I'm starting to detect some sort of dissatisfaction amongst a number of the inspectorate over this, and we'll see where that lands. But anyway, that's
where
Ofsted
going to take COVID into consideration this term.
Well, yeah, I've read some of the reports. Well, good luck reading it.
Yeah.
If you can find it, that's great. But actually, at the end of the day, I think people have been writing, contacting me saying, well, actually, the reason why. We suffered because we had middle leaders who were not able to articulate the curriculum sort of plan for their department sufficiently well, and that actually had a negative impact. Whereas we think actually this is about COVID, isn't it? I think this is where we are at the moment, and actually I personally think, if people have got time to do sort of curriculum development during COVID, well done. But actually, let's try and keep, a reasonable sort of school running, and let's make sure that, every effort is going into making sure that we deliver high quality lessons, and of course, planning those is important, but actually doing school-based whole curriculum reviews at the moment, I think, is a challenge, and probably not where I would be devoting my time.
And
but anyway,
sorry, Frank, just to go back to that attendance, that actually, if you walk around any school at the moment, they've got different hybrid models of teaching going on in different classrooms. So if you walk around my school at the moment, there may be 28 children in front of them, but there may be 4 children at home, and they're still teaching them, and they're on Teams or whatever, other platforms are available. That they are still teaching them at the same time in the class, if they're well enough to attend, having COVID at home. And then you might have another group of children who are too ill to attend, and therefore they might need that catch up, that lesson at another time, and they might be accessing through a remote portal, for example. So I think it kind of all comes full circle, doesn't it, in terms of what teachers are having to do is to really think about how, those are all different modes of teaching. So I might deliver my lesson normally like this, but actually what they've had to do over the last 12 months is think about how they deliver that in different hybrid models, which is interesting. And next week's Frankenstein chat, I'm sure, is about this. But that also is making them think in a different way about the curriculum. And how they are developing their curriculum, if that makes sense.
Yes. It's funny because we had probably one of our first guests actually made clear that he felt that the experience of home learning had been a very positive one for his child, and that actually this assumption that we go back just to putting children in front of the classroom and ignore some of the learning about for some children in some situations, that this is a way forward. This could actually get children back into the classroom, and actually re-engage more. And he certainly felt as though it had been a positive experience for his daughter. But so
there's the opposite end of it, Frank, because I know in the school where I'm a governor, one parent had written in to say that they're going to homeschool their child now as a result, but would want the school still to provide the lessons. So
you've got to give it to them.
That one out.
But then, and I suppose you've got to ask the question why that is, and that goes back to what you were saying, Frank, isn't it? In terms of that could be to do with the fact that that it's actually easier on their mental health. There is something about not being in a classroom under pressure to put my hand up or whatever it might be, or moving around the corridors or something. But no, certainly there's a lot of learning, and I think that goes back to Neil's blog, doesn't it? In terms of a lot of really positive learning that we've done in schools over these 12 months, and it is remarkable, and that all needs to be celebrated. It really does.
Really
okay.
does.
Well, on that point, we'll close this week's 72nd edition of the Frankenstein chat, and just want to thank Rebecca and Neil for giving us their time. And it's been a fascinating discussion, and we'd love to have you back next year. Do a COVID update. Hopefully it'll all be out of the way and everything will be rocking into these exams. So, but anyway, lovely to speak to you all.
Didn't we say that last year, Frank?
I think we say it every time, don't we, Stan? But anyway, we'll see you all soon. So hopefully next week. I think there's no guest next week, so it's gonna be Frankenstein. No, I'm wrong. It's the week after. So next week we have Stephen Tierney from the head teachers round table, who's joining us next week. So we've got Stephen next week. So thank you all.
Will you do a Halloween special Frankenstein?
Well, never thought about it.
We also had Frankenstein. The famous misprint from Johnny, from Leeds?
Johnny Mitchell, yeah.
Johnny Mitchell, yeah.
All right, so Frank and Satan, Frankenstein, we say goodbye, and we'll see you all next week.
Okay.